And welcome to our guests. And before we get started, I'd like to confirm that Director Merrell Floyd is on the line. Good morning, Merrell. And Director Bill Finn is not going to make it today. He's not on the call. He had a conflict. So I'd like to call this meeting to order. This is a special board meeting for Santee Cooper. And if you're a guest in attendance today, it's going to be a fairly boring meeting because we're going to go into executive session immediately, and most of the meeting itself will be executive session. We'll come out of executive session and we'll have a couple of business matters to discuss at the end of executive session. So at this time, I would ask for a motion to enter into executive session to receive legal advice and discuss negotiations incident to proposed contractual arrangements related to Act 95 and to conform to the confidentiality requirements of Act 95. Do I have a motion?
So moved. Second.
Motion and second. All in favor?
Aye.
We are in executive session. Ladies and gentlemen, the board has voted to go into executive session for purposes permitted under FOIA and conform to the confidentiality requirements of Act 95. And we actually have okay, well, welcome back, everybody. Thank you for your patience. The board has voted to come out of executive session, and I'll note that in executive session, no action was taken by the board. Next on the agenda is our CEO, Mark B.Bonsall.
Well, as you are aware, Act 95 imposes very strict confidentiality requirements at this stage of the DOA process, prohibiting Santee Cooper from engaging in public discussion of the terms of Santee Cooper's reform plan. This is why the board has been in executive session for your consideration of the specific terms and components of that plan. Because public bodies such as Santee Cooper cannot take action in executive session, we have returned to public session for the purpose of the actual vote on the plan. As a result of Act 95 confidentiality provisions, the resolution that you have before you and any discussion in this public session cannot mention the specifics of the reform plan. There will be a future time when the contents and terms of the reform plan can be made public, and Santee Cooper will do so as soon as permitted within the requirements of Act 95. I would also remind everyone that we can publicly discuss the business plan that was approved by the board on September 9th, and we have provided a one-page summary description to all of you today. And that's the sole and exclusive introduction to this issue, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mark. I'd ask for a motion to approve the resolution. Motion second. Any comments before we vote?
I'd like to thank staff for all the work.
Yeah, I'd echo that. I mean, obviously we can't say much, but here's what I will say. It's been a busy 4 months. 4 months ago, we hired a new CEO and deputy CEO. 2 months after that, we formally adopted our business plan that we're currently executing. And we are executing on that business plan. I think you'll hear a little bit about that during the President's report. 2 months later, where we sit today, we are about to adopt a reform plan that will essentially guide the future of Santee Cooper. And several of us have been in the headquarters from over the last 2 to 3 months, and at least it's my impression that there's a renewed energy inside the company, and there are a lot of people working around the clock on this. And you know, I on behalf of the board, we thank you all for all your work. We know it's been a difficult and stressful 2 or 3 months, and we appreciate all that you've done, and just want on behalf of the board to make sure that we thank you for that work and that effort. And with that, I'll call for the vote. All in favor of the motion? Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries. And I'd also add a comment now that I did have a chance to talk to Director Bill Finn, who's not here today, but he's fully supportive of this plan and just wanted to pass along those words to the rest of the board as well.
Thank you.
Okay, next item on the agenda will be a presentation by our General Counsel, Mike Baxley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and good morning, ladies and gentlemen. You have before you a 2-page document which is entitled an Act 95 Compliance Indemnification Authorization. That resolution has 2 exhibits to it. Exhibit A is the indemnification agreement itself, which consists of approximately 14 pages, including the signature page. And then there is Exhibit B, which is a list of Santee Cooper employees that are engaged with compliance in Act 95. And I think in a few moments, B.Bonsall will talk a little bit more, just mentioned, about the level of engagement from Santee Cooper in compliance with Act 95. You will recall that Section 1C of Act 95 requires Santee Cooper to provide any and all resources necessary to assist in the Act 95 process. And this became an all-encompassing task. And again, as I mentioned a moment ago, Mr. Bonsall will talk about that more in a moment, but just stated succinctly, we've had multiple employees engaged in the process of making management presentations to bidders, answering bidders' questions, as well as completing disclosure schedules for the asset purchase agreement, also making multiple representations and warranties. And I would simply say to you that there is significant personal and corporate liability in any corporate acquisition transaction, and particularly one of this size and of this magnitude. So this is certainly true when there are multiple bidders that are on the other side of the transaction that are in competition with one another and thus have divergent interests potentially with the other bidders as well as with Santee Cooper, who is also in effect a bidder in the process through the reform plan. So upon the advice of our external counsel, which is Nixon Peabody, joined by our internal counsel at Santee Cooper, it's been recommended that personal liability protections be put in place to safeguard Santee Cooper employees, officers, and directors who are acting in good faith and in response to work requirements arising under Act 95. And that's what this resolution and accompanying documents does. And this type of agreement is standard in the mergers and acquisitions industry, and this specific agreement is that you have before you is tailored to a public entity. This is a best practices corporate response to the sale process in which we're engaged. So Exhibit A establishes the process by which an employee would be entitled to indemnification. There is no indemnification for any Santee Cooper employee or director or officer who is, when the activity is not in good faith or is criminal in nature or constitutes fraud. Now, this type of protection for employees strengthens the Act 95 process, I would submit to you, ladies and gentlemen, because, as is stated in the resolution itself, it assures the continued service of employees being required to make representations and warranties and enhances those employees' ability to be more effective in discharging those duties. So in my capacity as General Counsel, I recommend this resolution to you, and again, ask for is passage, but I'll be glad to answer any questions that you may have. I do want to make one other comment, if I may. The Department of Administration is aware of this process. We did not ask them to approve, nor did they offer to approve or disapprove, but I will say, and we appreciate their cooperation through their advisors, the law firm Gibson Dunn, of making certain recommendations to the text of the agreement itself, several of which were accepted by Santee Cooper in improvement of the document. I'd be glad to answer any questions that you may have. Thank you.
Okay. Before call for the vote, any comments or from fellow board members?
I'll make one or two. Not only is it standard operating procedure to do an indemnification in the same or similar circumstances for any company that finds themselves where we are in this regard, not only is it legally appropriate, it's the right thing to do for our employees. And under these facts and circumstances, to leave over 300 of our employees twisting in the wind would be irresponsible and not the appropriate action for us to take, in my opinion.
Anyone else? So I'll add to what David said. This seems like it's well, it has been a very big undertaking. It's an unusual process. Santee Cooper is not in control of the documents that would lead to a sale, including the asset purchase agreement, and therefore we are unable to include these type of protections in the documentation process. This may be moot because there may or may not be a sale. It may be moot because it could be included at a later time in an asset purchase agreement, or frankly, it could be included in any enabling statutes that the legislature were to adopt that authorize the sale of Santee Cooper. And you would typically expect to see those protections of state employees in a document such as that, in enabling statutes of that nature. So this may be moot at some point, but in the absence of clarity of all of those types of things, we thought it was reasonable and appropriate to go ahead and provide for the indemnification protection of our employees. That's sort of the way I looked at this. With that, I'll ask for a motion on the resolution. Motion and second. All in favor? Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you, Mike. Okay, next on the agenda is the President's report. I'll ask Mr. Bonsall to lead us through that.
Thank you, and thank you for your prior action on behalf of all employees. During the initial preparation for the DOA process to illustrate the extent and depth of activity and work on behalf of Santee Cooper employees, we received 300 extensive data requests from DOA bankers, lawyers, and consultants, and we populated the data room itself with in excess of 20,000 documents. The next step in the process required extensive hours by management staff to develop management presentations intended to provide an overview of Santee Cooper for potential bidders. We received 450 questions in advance of meetings with the bidders and held 5 individual 5-hour management presentation meetings, having answered all those questions. Subsequent to these management presentation meetings, we received over 1,900 questions or requests via Tracker, which is an Excel spreadsheet that's used to manage requests coming from the various bidders through the DOA. In addition, we have held 52 conference calls. We've hosted 10 site visits with potential bidders. The data room at this point now holds over 30,000 documents provided by Santee Cooper. Finally, we've been working with the DOA on the asset purchase agreement, and we have populated some 50 due diligence schedules in that effort. In total, in excess of 330 employees have participated in this massive effort and process. To date, the employees have been putting in long days and nights to provide the level of assistance to the DOA necessary while still meeting the requirements of their regular jobs. This is a great workforce. Pleased to work with them, and appreciate your recognition of the effort that has been extended by them to get us to this point. And with that, I don't have anything else to add. I will ask Pamela to come up and talk about a CCR issue, and then to close as well with Shawan on good news on the bond deal. But before that, if you have any questions of me, I'm happy to answer them before I sit down. Thank you very much. Pamela.
Thank you, Mark. Mr. Chairman, members of the board, I just want to make you aware of 2 public meetings that will be conducted in the month of December, and these are required under the EPA's coal combustion residuals, or CCR, rule. We've talked about the rule before. The rule does require closure of impoundments that contain coal combustion residuals, and that for us is coal ash and gypsum slurry. So there are certain triggers that if they're met, you have to close the impoundment. And so we do have impoundments at Cross Station and at Wynya Station that trigger closure. And the reason they trigger closure is because they are less than 5 feet above the highest aquifer. So we're in the low country. That's where we find ourselves. And so there is not that 5-foot buffer. And so the purpose of the public meeting is to inform the communities near these sites about what Santee Cooper's plans are to handle the closure, what the closure plan is, how we will go about dealing with the product that's there, and to give the public an opportunity for questions and input. So as you know, Santee Cooper has committed at these sites that we will close the ponds through excavation. So we will excavate the CCRs, and we will either beneficially reuse or we will remove them to lined landfills. So we have received kudos nationwide for our efforts in this regard, and so we don't anticipate any adverse comments at the public meetings, but we will hold those on December 3rd at Cross Station and December 10th at Wynya Station, and I just want to make you aware. Any questions? Okay, so I will recognize, as Mark said, Shawan Gillens. You approved a bond deal last week, and she got it done this morning, so she's going to tell you about the results.
Thank you, Pamela, Mr. Bonsall, Chairman Ray, members of the board, good morning. As Pamela noted, last week we had a meeting. You approved the 47th supplemental resolution to Santee Cooper's bond resolution in anticipation that we would be closing the bond deal that following morning. We did not. We have, however, officially closed the bond deal as of about 10:15 this morning. DTC's completed, cash in the bank. So just to give you a little bit of a stat sheet, if you will, on how that transaction closed, we sold $163 million approximately in bonds. The projected interest rate that we spoke to you about in September, and then again immediately prior to beginning the transaction, was 2.5%. The market has worked with us, and we closed on an interest rate of 1.19%. The bond maturities will match those bond maturities of the mini bonds that they are replacing. That runs from 2021 to 2036 with annual pay downs in those intervening years. The savings in debt service to Santee Cooper and therefore to its customers is $40 million over the life of those bonds, so 16 years. A little bit about how those proceeds were used. Again, we refunded the remaining mini bonds outstanding. You might hear those of us in the Treasury group and elsewhere refer to them as the Turca bonds, and that's just because they took out series that were implicated in the Turca lawsuit filed against Santee Cooper. A little bit of financial data on that. The weighted average of those bonds outstanding was approximately 4%. And as noted, we're well below that now. So that's a big driver for those savings. We also realized, or I should say, giving a shout out to my colleague Rahul Dimbla, that we had a little bit more room and we could also refund some outstanding water system debt to the benefit of that system. So we've included that in the process as well with the consent of the Department of Administration. The average weighted debt of that commercial paper, which is itself variable rate, was about 2.25. So again, savings for the water system as well. The largest orders placed were by what I would consider the usual suspects, J.P. Morgan, BlackRock, Vanguard. We also had some activity from Wells Capital, Capri, and T. Rowe Price. In terms of subscription, we were oversubscribed on the deal. So if 1 times is all of the bonds that we had available, we were subscribed at 1.25 to 1.5 over what we had available for sale. The purchasers were interested in populating their money market funds, bond funds, and there were also a couple of private wealth investors. And just to give you a little bit of flavor on that, our bonds were sold in denominations of $100,000. So these are sophisticated buyers. Any questions? Anything I can answer for you?
I'd like to, again, thank staff. We're keeping our eye on every opportunity to acquire savings for our customers, and ran into a little bit of a hiccup last week, but backed up and went right back at it again and got it done today. So congratulations, Shawan, to you and your folks' team effort. But great job. Terrific job. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Shawan. Okay. I think that concludes the formal part of the meeting. I'll ask any comments before we adjourn. Again, just want to thank the staff. It's been an enormous undertaking. We're not there quite yet. We've got till Monday at noon, I think, is when the submission is due. So I know lots of people will be working over the weekend to finish it up. But thanks again for all your hard work. And we'll look forward to the opportunity to talk about the plan at the appropriate time with our customers and stakeholders. So with that, I'll ask for a motion to adjourn. Move second. All in favor? We are adjourned.